Discussions of the Scriptures of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Terry Ball, Professor of Ancient Scripture in the Department of Ancient Scripture at Brigham Young University, and I'm joined today for this discussion by three of my colleagues, also from the Department of Ancient Scripture. Seated next to me is Professor Paul Hoskisson. Welcome, Paul. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Also joining us today is Professor Clyde Williams. Thanks for being here, Clyde.
Thank you.
And also joining us, we're always delighted to have Professor Gay Strathern with us. Good to have you, Gay.
Thanks.
Today we're going to continue our discussion of the Book of Mormon, and we're going to begin with 1Nephi chapter 3. A little bit of the setting here. Lehi and his family have fled Jerusalem at the instruction of the Lord. They've traveled probably over 200 miles down by the shores of the Red Sea. They're camped in the valley of Lemuel by the river of Laman. We don't know how long they've been there, but one day Father calls the boys in and says, "Folks, we want you to go back to Jerusalem. This has probably been a two-week trip away from Jerusalem. We want you to go back and get the plates." One of the questions that always comes to my mind is, why didn't they take the plates with them when they left the first time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you would think, you wouldn't have to bother going back and getting them. It's possible that they were worried that if they took them with the first time, that someone would notice that they had taken them and they would have been followed, and that certainly Lehi didn't want that.
I think the Lord clearly understood that this was going to be a challenge, plus a real teaching opportunity for Laman and Lemuel, who were going to struggle. And they're going to find out just how hard it is, and it's going to be important that they're a safe distance away, because lives are going to be in danger. Obviously, without the Lord's intervention here, they could have been killed, all four of the boys and others. So I think that the Lord really knew what he was doing, and gives this long period of time that they're away to try to reach out to Laman and Lemuel as well.
I think it's also kind of a testing ground for them. It's certainly a test for Laman and Lemuel. How are they going to react? And it also becomes a bit of a testing ground for Nephi. Back in chapter 2, we'd had him that the Lord had told him to, "If you keep my commandments, you will prosper." Well, here's the first chance for Nephi to put that declaration into practice. Is he going to respond to that? Is he really going to say, the Lord has done something, okay, I'm willing to do it? And we get that wonderful, wonderful statement that he makes in chapter 3, verse 7, "I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded." And so I think that that's a very important seed in relation to chapter 2. He gets the commandment now, and now he's putting it into practice.
I think it's also an opportunity for Sariah to test her own faith, to find out how faithful she is. And as we see in chapter 5, she comes through.
She comes through. It's a struggle for her, but she comes through. We see Nephi begin to assume the role that he's going to occupy throughout the rest of the time that he's on the face of the earth here. This is a time for him to emerge and to justify the position that he'll eventually assume, in spite of what his brethren thinks he's deserving of.
And yet it seems, when they're going back, of course, that Laman is, as the older one, seems to me at least, to be in charge, and is given the right to determine who's going to go, or how they're going to determine who's going to go, before Laban to inquire of the plates. And it's my own personal view that rather than just as the oldest, I should be the one to go, he's looking for a cop-out. And so he's going to say, we'll cast lots, and this is the way that the Lord would manifest his will. But I think indeed, because Laman is not really believing, he's thinking, here's 3 out of 4 chances I've got to not have to go do this. And I think the Lord fixes it. I'm sure that he wants to make sure that Laman knows just how hard and impossible this is, so that when they do finally get the plates, there's no way he could really think, we got the plates, or even that Nephi got the plates, that somehow the Lord's going to have to intervene here for them to get these plates.
Well, there's precedence for God to work that way. You think of Gideon, when he had to reduce his forces to make sure there'd be no question that it was God who was going to bring them deliverance and accomplish this miracle, not the arm of flesh.
And it's appropriate that Laban, being the oldest, gets that first chance to do this. Yep.
He should be the one leading out, shouldn't he?
Yes.
Right. Yep.
But from the very beginning, with Nephi's testimony, we see he is the one leading out. I will go and do. Just for verse 7 of chapter 3, I'm glad God sent them back to get the plates so we could have this. You think of the doctrine taught in verse 7. I mean, we always marvel at how wonderful Nephi is and his great courage and faith. But the doctrine there is profound, where he says, I know that the Lord giveth no commandments unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them that they may accomplish the thing which he hath commanded them. That is so fundamental to our faith. You think about what the consequences would be if God gave commandments we could not keep. he'd cease to be just, he'd cease to be fair, he'd cease to be God. But Nephi knows that. He doesn't know how, but he knows.
And it's that statement then that leads his father to recognize in verse 8 that his son has had his heart softened, that he has that spiritual testimony, because he recognizes in the tone that Nephi speaks it in that Nephi knows now this is the right thing.
But it's still going to be a little bit of a test for Nephi, right? Because even though the Lord is going to provide a way, he doesn't provide it immediately for him. And he still has to do a lot of work, and all of the brothers do. But it's not this thing, the Lord will bless you, and it happens immediately, so you get that immediate reward coming back. Nephi's faith is still going to be put to the test here as he sees them making the efforts to go and do it, and it failing, and having to try again, and having it failing. But ultimately, his faith is that the Lord will provide a way. And so that's why he wants to keep going when Laman and Lemuel want to go back, because he's committed to go and do, not just to go and try like Laman and Lemuel.
Yeah, he's goal-oriented. I mean, the prophet has set out what the goal is, obtain the plates. And Nephi's not going to stop until he's obtained the plates. And even when he makes the third attempt alone, he really doesn't know exactly what he's going to do either. Yep. But he just knows he's got to go and get the job done.
Nephi seems to have understood the importance of these plates. I wonder if the boys knew. Nephi seems to come, but maybe we ought to just... why are these plates so important?
Well, you know, it's interesting when we look at the whole story here. The Lord's going to tell them that a whole nation will dwindle in unbelief. So it's going to preserve for them, as we read later, their history, the records of the prophecies of the Jews. It's going to preserve for them the prophecies of the holy prophets. It's going to preserve the commandments. It's going to, all of these things that, and we're going to see later in the Book of Mormon, a group, the Amalekites, who come without a record, and indeed the very things the Lord said would happen have happened to them. They're in a state of civil war among themselves. The Amalekites are. They're in a state where they've lost belief in God, their language, everything that you would think would happen that would lead society to destruction has happened to them because they haven't had Scripture. So the point here is you just really need Scripture if you're going to do well in this world and in life. And we're going to see this theme run throughout the whole of the Book of Mormon. Think about the times when people are leaving the Scriptures alone and they turn back to the Scriptures and get their act together. The Lord's going to keep reminding us again, and this is one of the first, how important it is to have the Word. So they're on the way to get the Word. And you're not going to make it well in life without the Word.
I think one of the questions out here is, why is Laban so insistent in hanging on to them, right? Why would they? Obviously they're important, not just for the reasons that Clyde has mentioned, but he has a sense that these are important and he doesn't want to give them up. And I think that kind of fits in with kind of what's going on in the larger milieu. There is this sense of records are important at this time. We know that is it Ashurbanipal in Assyria is collecting libraries and he's wanting to keep texts, and so the sense of history is coming through here that's important. We need to have records. And so Laban wants to hold on to them. And the records, I think, also give a sense of right to leadership, or it's certainly going to be that way with the Nephites and the Lamanites, because something important in them, not just for the religious reasons, that would make Laban want to hang on to them as much as he does.
Yeah.
Very good.